Look at almost any American suburb, no matter the state, no matter the climate, no matter the history. The houses look the same. The streets feel identical. The neighborhoods repeat themselves endlessly. This was not an accident. It was not just a trend, and it was not about beauty. It was the result of powerful economic forces, government policy, hidden rules, and a vision of the American dream that quietly reshaped the entire country. Tonight, we explore why American suburbs look exactly the same, and what that sameness reveals about power, profit, and modern life.
The illusion of choice in the American suburb. At first glance, American suburbs appear diverse. Different colors, different names, different marketing slogans. But look closer. The same floor plans repeat. The same street patterns loop endlessly. The same setbacks, garages, lawns, and cul-de-sacs appear again and again. This repetition is not a coincidence. It is the product of a system designed for efficiency, control, and scale. To understand why American suburbs look identical, we must first understand a simple truth. Suburbs were never designed primarily for individuality. They were designed for mass production. The suburb as a manufactured product. Unlike historic cities, suburbs were not shaped slowly over centuries. They were built quickly, in massive quantities, by large developers. After World War II, the United States faced an unprecedented housing demand. Millions of soldiers returned home. Families were growing. Cities were crowded, industrial, and increasingly seen as dangerous. America needed houses, fast. And speed changes everything. Architects were no longer designing unique homes for individual clients. Developers were designing systems, standardized designs, repeatable layouts, predictable construction methods. A house was no longer a craft object. It became a unit. The logic of repetition. Repetition was not aesthetic, it was economic. Using the same house design reduced costs dramatically. Materials could be ordered in bulk. Construction crews repeated the same tasks. Mistakes decreased. Timelines shortened. Every variation cost money. Every unique detail slowed production. Uniformity became efficiency. Efficiency became profit. And profit shaped the landscape. Why variation was discouraged? In theory, developers could have offered more variety. In practice, variation created risk. Banks preferred predictable products. Insurers preferred standardized structures. Municipalities preferred uniform zoning compliance. A house that looked like every other house was easier to finance, easier to insure, easier to approve. Sameness reduced uncertainty, and in real estate, uncertainty is expensive. The role of government standards. This sameness was reinforced by regulation, building codes, zoning laws, setback requirements, minimum lot sizes. These rules were often written with one goal in mind: control. Control over density, control over land use, control over social composition. The result was a narrow design corridor. Builders were free to build, as long as they built the same thing. The suburb promise. To buyers, this uniformity was not presented as limitation. It was sold as safety. A familiar environment, predictable neighbors, stable property values. Sameness became reassurance. If every house looked similar, no single home could disrupt the market. If every street followed the same pattern, nothing unexpected would happen. Uniform design became a form of social insurance. The hidden cost of sameness. But this came with consequences. Places lost identity. Architecture lost regional expression. Neighborhoods became interchangeable. A suburb in Arizona could resemble one in Ohio. Climate, culture, and history were overridden by spreadsheets. American suburbs began to look less like places and more like products. The key insight. American suburbs look exactly the same because they were never meant to be unique. They were designed to be scalable, repeatable, financially predictable. Architecture became logistics. And once that system was established, it became self-reinforcing.
The invention of the American suburb. Before suburbs existed, American cities looked very different. At the beginning of the 20th century, most Americans lived in dense urban neighborhoods. People walked to work. Streetcars connected districts. Homes, shops, schools, and churches were built close together. Cities were compact, noisy, imperfect, but efficient. The suburb was not a natural evolution. It was an invention.
The desire to escape the city. By the early 1900s, American cities were growing rapidly. Industrialization brought jobs, but also pollution, overcrowding, and disease. Factories filled the air with smoke. Tenement housing packed families into small, unhealthy spaces. Noise, traffic, and social tension became part of daily life. For the middle and upper classes, the city began the invention of the American suburb. Before suburbs existed, American cities looked very different. At the beginning of the 20th century, most Americans lived in dense urban neighborhoods. People walked to work. Streetcars connected districts. Homes, shops, schools, and churches were built close together. Cities were compact, noisy, imperfect, but efficient. The suburb was not a natural evolution. It was an invention. The desire to escape the city. By the early 1900s, American cities were growing rapidly. Industrialization brought jobs, but also pollution, overcrowding, and disease. Factories filled the air with smoke. Tenement housing packed families into small, unhealthy spaces. Noise, traffic, and social tension became part of daily life. For the middle and upper classes, the city began to feel dangerous, not just physically, but socially. Many Americans wanted distance. Distance from factories, distance from immigrants, distance from poverty, distance from unpredictability. The idea emerged, a quiet residential area outside the city, connected by rail or road, surrounded by greenery. This idea already existed in Europe, but in America, it would become something entirely different. Early suburbs and the promise of order. The first American suburbs appeared along streetcar lines in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They were not identical yet. Early suburbs featured varied house designs, tree-lined streets, local architectural character, walkable layouts. These neighborhoods still felt connected to the city. They were an extension, not an escape. But even then, a powerful idea was taking shape. The home as a private sanctuary, separated from work, separated from commerce, separated from public life. This separation would later define suburban form. The cultural shift toward the single-family home. In American culture, the single-family house became more than shelter. It became a symbol of independence, success, moral stability, personal freedom. Owning a detached house meant you had made it. Unlike European cities, which embraced shared walls and dense living, American ideology leaned toward space and separation. More land, more privacy, more distance. This mindset would soon collide with technology, policy, and mass production. Automobiles changed everything. The true suburban explosion did not begin with houses, it began with cars. As automobiles became affordable in the early 20th century, distance stopped being a problem. You no longer needed to live near work. You no longer needed streetcars. You no longer needed density. The car allowed cities to spread outward endlessly. Roads replaced rail lines. Highways replaced main streets. Parking replaced public squares. Suburbs could now exist far from the city and still function. But this freedom came with a hidden cost, the need for standardization. Developers take control of the landscape. As demand for suburban housing increased, private developers stepped in. They didn't think like architects, they thought like manufacturers. To maximize profit, developers needed speed, predictability, cost efficiency. Custom design was slow. Variety was expensive. Uniqueness created risk. The solution was repetition. Build one house, refine it, then build it hundreds of times. Same structure, same materials, same layout. Only minor changes, a different roof angle, a mirrored floor plan, were allowed. This was the beginning of suburban sameness. Zoning laws locked the pattern in place. At the same time, local governments introduced zoning laws. These laws separated land into rigid categories: residential, commercial, industrial. Single-family residential zones became dominant in suburbs. These zones banned apartments, banned mixed-use buildings, banned corner shops, banned density. Only detached houses were allowed. Zoning didn't just shape buildings, it shaped lifestyles. You could no longer walk to a store. You could no longer live above a shop. You needed a car for everything. And because zoning rules were standardized across cities and states, suburban layouts began to look identical everywhere. Standardization becomes the norm. By the 1930s and 1940s, the ingredients were complete: automobiles, zoning laws, mass production, cultural desire for sameness. The suburb was no longer experimental. It was a formula that could be copied from California to New Jersey without change. Street widths, lot sizes, setbacks, garage placement, everything followed rules.
Architecture became secondary. Efficiency became primary. Suburbs were no longer designed as places. They were produced as products. And the most powerful force that would push this model to its extreme was still ahead: World War II.
Mass production, Levittown, and the birth of identical suburbs. To understand why American suburbs look the same, we have to look at how they were built, not just where. The key word is mass production. After World War II, the United States faced an unprecedented housing crisis. Millions of soldiers were returning home. They wanted stability, family life, and a piece of the American dream. But there was a problem. Cities were overcrowded. Construction was slow. Traditional building methods could not keep up with demand. America needed housing, fast, cheap, and in massive numbers. And this is where everything changed. Levittown, the suburb that changed America. In the late 1940s, a developer named William Levitt applied industrial thinking to housing. Instead of building one house at a time, he treated housing like an assembly line. This was revolutionary. At Levittown, New York, construction was broken into specialized steps. One crew poured foundations, another framed walls, another installed plumbing, another did roofing. Each worker repeated the same task over and over, just like a factory. The result? A house could be built in less than a day. At peak production, Levittown produced one house every 16 minutes. This was not architecture as art. This was architecture as system. Standardization as a feature, not a bug. Levitt homes were intentionally simple. They used identical floor plans, identical roof shapes, identical materials, identical setbacks. Why? Because variation slowed production. Every unique design meant new calculations, new materials, new delays. Uniformity was not accidental. It was essential. In this system, sameness meant lower costs, faster construction, predictable results. And for millions of Americans, this was perfect. The houses were affordable. They had yards. They were safe. They represented progress. Sameness felt modern. The model home effect. Developers quickly realized something powerful. When buyers saw a model home, they didn't want creativity. They wanted certainty. They wanted the same house as their neighbor, the same layout they had just walked through, the same lifestyle they were promised. Uniform neighborhoods felt safe, predictable, comforting. Developers learned that selling sameness was easier than selling uniqueness, so they repeated it over and over. Suburbs as a product, not a place. This is a crucial shift. Traditional towns evolved slowly over centuries. Suburbs were designed, packaged, and sold. They were not organic. They were planned products. Marketing materials showed smiling families, green lawns, quiet streets, identical homes forming perfect order. The message was clear. This is what success looks like. This is what stability looks like. This is what normal looks like. Architecture became branding. Why design variation was discouraged? Even when variation was possible, it was often discouraged. Why? Because uniformity simplified maintenance, protected property values, reduced perceived risk. Banks preferred predictive neighborhoods. Insurance companies preferred predictive construction. Local governments preferred predictive layouts. Sameness became institutionalized. Difference became a liability. The psychology of uniformity. There is also a psychological layer. Identical suburbs created a sense of belonging. If your house looked like everyone else's, you felt like you belonged. Standing out felt risky. Architecture reinforced social conformity. This was not accidental. It was structural. From one suburb to a national template, Levittown was copied everywhere. California, Texas, Illinois, Florida. Developers reused the same logic: standardized plans, repetitive layouts, minimal variation. Over time, regional identity disappeared. A suburb in Arizona began to resemble one in New Jersey. Climate mattered less, culture mattered less, efficiency mattered more. America didn't just build suburbs, it replicated them. The long shadow of mass housing. The mass-produced suburbs solved a short-term crisis, but it created long-term consequences. Uniform design limited walkability, adaptability, architectural diversity. Neighborhoods became locked into one moment in time. What was efficient in 1950 became restricted decades later. But by then, the pattern was unstoppable. Why this still matters today? Modern suburbs still follow this logic. Even today, developers reuse the same plans, cities approve predictable layouts, buyers choose familiar designs. The system rewards repetition. And that is why when you drive through American suburbs, everything feels the same. Not because of laziness, but because sameness was designed into the system from the beginning.
Zoning laws and the death of variety. To understand why American suburbs look identical, we have to talk about something most people never see: zoning laws. Not architecture, not design trends, not even developers. Rules. Invisible rules that quietly shape everything you see. The birth of Euclidean zoning. In the early 20th century, American cities were chaotic. Factories sat next to homes, shops mixed with apartments, noise, smoke, and crowds were everywhere. So cities introduced zoning laws to create order. In 1926, the U.S. Supreme Court approved what became known as Euclidean zoning, a system that strictly separates land by use. Residential here, commercial there, industrial far away. On paper, it sounded logical. In reality, it changed American cities forever. How zoning shaped the suburbs. Suburban zoning was designed with one priority: single-family homes, large lots, low density, strict rules. No corner shops, no mixed-use buildings, no apartments near houses. This meant entire neighborhoods had to be built the same way. Same house type, same setbacks, same lot size. Variation became illegal. Not discouraged, not expensive, illegal. Why creativity died at the regulation level. Zoning codes dictate everything: how tall a house can be, how far it must sit from the street, how wide the driveway must be, how much parking is required, even how many windows face the road. Architects didn't stop being creative. They were boxed in. Design freedom was replaced by compliance. If a design doesn't meet code, it doesn't get built. The financial logic of uniformity. Once zoning removed flexibility, developers followed the math. Uniform designs are cheaper. One blueprint reused hundreds of times. One supply chain, one construction process, one approval process. Every variation costs time. Time costs money. In suburban development, efficiency beats beauty. Always. The loop that locked suburbs in place. Here's the system that formed. Zoning demands uniformity, developers optimize for repetition, banks prefer predictable models, cities approve what they already know, buyers get used to sameness, and once people accept it, it becomes normal. Suburbs stopped evolving, they started copying themselves. Why Europe didn't follow this path. In many European cities, zoning evolved differently. Mixed-use neighborhoods remained legal, density was allowed, variation survived. That's why European suburbs still feel distinct, even when built at the same time. America chose separation, Europe chose integration. The results are visible from space. The unintended social effect. Zoning didn't just shake buildings, it shaped society. By locking suburbs into single-use, single-family patterns, car dependency became mandatory, social diversity declined, walkability disappeared, public life moved indoors, architecture became isolated, and isolation looks the same everywhere. American suburbs don't look identical because architects lacked imagination. They look identical because the system rewards sameness and punishes deviation. Zoning laws didn't just regulate land, they standardized life. And once rules shape design, design shapes culture.
The role of automobiles, designing life around the car. By the mid-20th century, American suburbs were no longer designed around people. They were designed around cars. This single shift changed suburban architecture more than any other factor. Cars redefined distance. Before cars, daily life was compact. Homes, shops, schools, and workplaces were close together because they had to be. Walking and public transport defined urban form. But once cars became affordable, distance stopped being a problem. Suddenly, people could live miles away from work, far from shops, isolated from public space. Suburbs expanded outward, not upward. Land was no longer precious, it was abundant. And abundance creates repetition. Zoning laws locked in car dependency. Suburban zoning made car ownership mandatory. Residential areas were separated from commercial areas, offices, schools, entertainment. This meant one thing: you could not function without a car. As a result, suburban design began to revolve around driveways, garages, wide roads, parking requirements. The house became a storage unit for vehicles. In many suburbs, the garage is the most prominent feature of the home, sometimes larger than the living room. The garage as a status symbol. In suburban America, the garage became a visual marker of success. One-car garage meant modest living. Two-car garage meant middle class. Three-car garage meant wealth. Developers responded by standardizing designs that showcased garages prominently. This created streets where garage doors dominate the facade, front porches shrink or disappear. Human interaction is reduced. Suburbs stopped facing the street. They faced the driveway. Street design reinforced uniformity. Suburban streets were engineered for vehicles, not people. Common features include wide lanes, long straight roads, cul-de-sacs, minimal sidewalks. These layouts prioritize traffic flow, safety for cars, predictable navigation. But they also eliminate spontaneous interaction, visual variety, organic growth. Curved streets with identical houses reduce decision-making for drivers and for developers. Uniformity becomes efficient. Parking minimums and visual repetition. Local governments required minimum parking for almost everything: houses, schools, shopping centers, churches.
This meant vast parking lots surrounded suburban life. Parking requirements forced similar setbacks, similar lot sizes, similar building footprints. When every house must accommodate vehicles in the same way, design options shrink dramatically. Repetition becomes inevitable. Why cars favor predictability? Cars move fast. Fast movement demands predictability. Drivers need consistent road widths, familiar signage, recognizable layouts. Suburban design adapted to human behavior behind the wheel. Neighborhoods became visually repetitive, cognitively simple, easy to navigate. This predictability reduces stress for drivers, but it also removes character. Suburbs as infrastructure, not places. Over time, suburbs became systems, not communities. They function like transportation networks, housing delivery mechanisms, traffic management zones. Architecture became secondary to logistics. Houses were no longer expressions of culture. They were components of a machine. And machines favor standardization. Why this look spread nationwide? Once this model proved profitable and efficient, it spread everywhere. From California to Florida, from Texas to the Midwest. Different climates, different histories, same suburban form. Because the system was optimized for cars, speed, cost, scale, not for uniqueness.
The economics of repetition. Why sameness makes suburbs financially inevitable. By the late 20th century, American suburbs did not look the same by accident. They looked the same because repetition became the most profitable design strategy. To understand this, we need to follow the money. Suburban development is not driven primarily by architects. It is driven by developers, financiers, insurers, and construction logistics. And all of them reward sameness. Standardization reduces risk. For developers, every new house is a financial gamble. But repetition turns uncertainty into predictability. When a builder constructs the same floor plan hundreds of times, material costs become predictable. Labor becomes faster and cheaper. Mistakes decrease. Timelines shorten. Profit margins stabilize. A house design that is already sold well is safer than a new idea. Original architecture introduces risk. Risk raises costs. Higher costs threaten profit. So developers do what markets reward. They repeat what already works. Mass production, not craft. Suburban housing follows the logic of factories, not cities. Framing crews specialize in one layout. Electricians memorize one wiring scheme. Plumbers repeat the same pipe runs. Speed matters more than beauty. In this system, variety is inefficient. Uniqueness slows production. Architecture becomes an assembly line. The neighborhood is not designed, it is manufactured. Banks and appraisers enforce sameness. Even if a developer wanted to build something different, the financial system would push back. Mortgage lenders rely on comparable properties. If your house is too different from its neighbors, appraisers struggle to value it. Lenders see it as risky. Buyers face financing problems. Sameness protects resale value. Uniform neighborhoods reassure banks that homes will behave like predictable financial assets. This turns architecture into economics. The house is no longer a place to live, it is a financial instrument. Insurance and risk modeling. Insurance companies also prefer repetition. Standard designs are easier to model for fire risk, easier to price for storm damage, easier to repair after disasters. A neighborhood of identical homes is easier to insure than a patchwork of unique buildings. And cheaper insurance makes developments more attractive to buyers. Sameness lowers perceived risk across the entire system. HOAs as economic control. Homeowners associations reinforce uniformity long after construction ends. Their stated goal is community maintenance. Their actual role is value protection. HOAs regulate paint colors, fences, landscaping, roof materials, exterior changes. Not because creativity is dangerous, but because deviation threatens market predictability. Uniform appearance sigmatability. Stability protects property values. Why buyers accept it? Many people ask, why do Americans tolerate this sameness? The answer is security. Uniform subrus gratis, safety. Predictability. Social conformity. Resale confidence. Difference feels risky. Sameness feels safe. For many families, a predictable neighborhood is a feature, not a flaw. The result? When economics, finance, insurance, and resale logic all align, architecture loses its freedom. Suburbs stop evolving organically. They freeze into repeatable templates. Not because people lack imagination, but because the system punishes difference. And yet, this sameness is not universal. Some countries build suburbs too, but they look very different. So why does American suburban sameness stand out so sharply on a global stage? That question takes us beyond the United States, to a comparison with the rest of the world.
How suburban design shapes behavior and culture. Why American suburbs look exactly the same. By the late 20th century, American suburbs were no longer just a housing solution. They had become a powerful system, one that quietly shaped how people lived,
moved, and thought. Suburban design did more than organize buildings. It organized daily life. Wide roads, long distances, and single-use zoning created a lifestyle built around the car. In most suburbs, walking was no longer practical. Public spaces were rare. Homes were separated from schools, shops, and workplaces. As a result, everyday life became fragmented. Children relied on parents for transportation. Teenagers depended on cars for independence. Adults spent hours each day commuting. The suburb wasn't designed for spontaneous interaction. It was designed for efficiency, privacy, and predictability. This had profound cultural consequences. The car as the center of suburban life. In American suburbs, the car is not just transportation. It is infrastructure, identity, and freedom. Garages are often larger than front porches. Driveways dominate the visual landscape. Streets prioritize speed over social space. This wasn't accidental. Federal highway funding, suburban zoning laws, and oil industry influence all reinforced car dependency. Cities invested in roads instead of sidewalks. Parking requirements ensured vast asphalt surfaces everywhere. As suburbs spread, walking became inconvenient, even unsafe. Distances grew too long, roads grew too wide. The result was a built environment where movement required machinery. Architecture followed this logic. Homes turned inward, backyards replaced front porches, garages became the primary entrance. The suburb became a place you arrived at, not a place you experienced. Privacy over community. Suburban uniformity also reshaped social behavior. Early suburban marketing promised peace, safety, and separation, not noise, not crowds, not unpredictability. The design delivered exactly that. Houses were spaced apart, fences defined boundaries, cul-de-sacs limited through traffic. While this created quiet neighborhoods, it also reduced chance encounters. There were fewer public squares, fewer corner stores, fewer reasons to linger outside. Community became scheduled rather than organic. Playdates replaced street play. Planned events replaced spontaneous gatherings. Suburban design didn't eliminate community, but it made it optional, controlled, and private. This reinforced a cultural shift toward individualism. The home became the center of life. The neighborhood became background. The psychology of sameness. Uniform design also had a psychological effect. When neighborhoods look identical, they feel interchangeable. When streets repeat the same patterns, orientation becomes harder. When architecture lacks landmarks, places lose memory. Suburbs often feel familiar, even when you've never been there before. This familiarity can be comforting, but it can also feel disorienting. Many sociologists argue that suburban sameness creates emotional distance. People feel safe but less connected, stable but less stimulated. Architecture shapes mood, and suburban architecture prioritizes calm over curiosity. The absence of visual complexity reduces friction, but also reduces identity. Consumption as a substitute for public life. As suburbs removed traditional public spaces, something else replaced them: shopping centers. Malls, big box stores, and strip plazas became the new gathering points. They were accessible by car, they offered parking, they felt controlled and safe. But they were privately owned. Unlike city squares or streets, these spaces existed for consumption. You could gather as long as you bought something. This transformed how Americans experienced shared space. Public life became commercial, social interaction became transactional. Architecture supported this shift. Buildings were designed for visibility from highways, not walkability. Signage replaced facades, parking replaced plazas. Suburban sameness extended beyond houses, into the commercial landscape as well. Why this design still persists? If suburban design has so many limitations, why does it continue? Because it works, economically and politically. Standardized suburbs are cheap to build, they're easy to approve, they're predictable for developers and lenders. Local governments rely on property taxes. Suburbs generate stable revenue without dense infrastructure. Homebuyers, meanwhile, continue to associate sameness with safety. Familiar design feels less risky. Uniform neighborhoods feel manageable. Change, in contrast, feels uncertain. Suburban design persists not because it's perfect, but because it's comfortable. Transition to the next question. Today, however, something is shifting. Rising housing costs, environmental concerns, a renewed interest in walkable communities.
A new generation is questioning the suburban model. And for the first time in decades, Americans are asking, what happens when the suburbs no longer meet our needs? In the next part, we'll explore how suburban uniformity is being challenged and what the future of American suburbs might look like.
The psychology of sameness, how uniform suburbs shape identity, behavior, and social life. By the time American suburbs reached full maturity in the late 20th century, sameness was no longer just an economic or planning outcome. It had become psychological. Uniform suburbs don't just look the same, they feel the same. And over decades, they quietly reshape how people see themselves, their neighbors, and their place in society. To understand why suburban sameness persists, we must understand what it does to the human mind. The comfort of predictability. Humans are wired to seek patterns. Predictable environments reduce stress. They make daily life easier to navigate. They create a sense of safety and control. American suburbs excel at this. You know where the school is. You know where the grocery store is. You know how wide the streets are. You know what the houses look like. This predictability creates emotional comfort, especially for families raising children. For many residents, sameness doesn't feel boring. It feels reassuring. That emotional reassurance is one of the strongest reasons suburbs resist change. Standardization as a signal of success. In American culture, suburbs became symbolic. A detached house, a lawn, a driveway, a garage. These elements signal stability, achievement, and upward mobility. When neighborhoods look uniform, they communicate something important. I belong here. I've made it. Difference, by contrast, can feel risky. A house that looks too different can feel like a disruption. A street that breaks the visual pattern can feel unsettling. Sameness becomes a social contract. If we all follow the rules, we all stay safe. How zoning shapes social behavior. Suburban zoning doesn't just separate buildings, it separates lives. Residential zones are isolated from workplaces, shops, cafes, cultural spaces. This forces most social interaction into controlled, planned environments: schools, churches, sports leagues, and private homes. Spontaneous encounters disappear. In older cities, people meet on sidewalks. In suburbs, people meet by appointment. This isolation reinforces sameness, not just visually, but socially. People interact mostly with others who earn similar incomes, share similar lifestyles, follow similar routines. Over time, difference fades. The garage door effect. One of the most powerful symbols of suburban psychology is the garage. In many suburbs, residents drive into the garage, close the door, enter the house, and never step onto the street. The street becomes a corridor, not a social space. Front porches disappear, sidewalk life disappear, casual conversation disappear. Architecture quietly reshapes behavior. When houses are designed for privacy and cars, community becomes optional. Sameness becomes invisible because no one is looking closely. Suburbs and the loss of place identity. Older cities have layers of history, buildings of different eras, different materials, different stories. Suburbs erase that. Most subdivisions are built all at once, by one developer, using one design language. This creates places without memory. Residents often describe their suburb as nice, quiet, safe, but rarely as unique. When every place looks similar, identity becomes internal, not shared. People identify with their house, their family, their routine, not with the place itself. Why difference feels like a threat? Homeowners associations, or HOAs, exist largely to protect sameness. Rules control paint colors, fence height, lawn appearance, house modifications. These rules are framed as detection of property values, but psychologically they protect something deeper: visual order. Difference introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty introduces fear. Sameness feels safe, even when it limits creativity. Suburban sameness and generational divide. Younger generations are reacting differently. Millennials and Gen Z often describe suburbs as isolating, boring, car-dependent, socially fragmented. They value walkability, diversity, visible history, mixed-use neighborhoods. This creates tension. Older generations see sameness as stability. Younger generations see it as stagnation. The suburb becomes a battleground of values. The invisible cost of uniformity. Uniform suburbs succeed economically. They succeed logistically, but they carry hidden costs: loneliness, lack of spontaneity, weak public life, reduced creativity. These are not easily measured, but deeply felt. And slowly, Americans are beginning to notice. The future of American suburbs. For decades, American suburbs were designed around one idea: predictability. Predictable houses, predictable streets, predictable lifestyles. But today, that system is beginning to crack. The forces that created identical suburbs, cheap land, federal policy, mass production, and car dependency, are no longer as stable as they once were. And the suburbs of the future will not look exactly like the suburbs of the past. 1. The end of infinite expansion. For most of the 20th century, suburbs could expand endlessly. Land was cheap, energy was abundant, infrastructure costs were ignored or deferred. But now, many cities are reaching their limits. Local governments are discovering that low-density suburbs are financially unsustainable. Roads, pipes, power lines, and schools cost more to maintain than suburban tax revenue can support. Parking lots, wide streets, and single-family zoning consume massive land, but generate relatively little economic return. As a result, cities are being forced to rethink how suburbs function, not because of ideology, but because of math. 2.
Zoning reform is changing the game. One of the most important shifts happening quietly across the United States is zoning reform. For nearly a century, single-family zoning made diversity illegal. Today, that is changing. Cities like Minneapolis, Portland, and parts of California have legalized duplexes and triplexes, allowed accessory dwelling units, reduced minimum lot sizes, eliminated parking minimums. These changes may sound small, but they directly attack the reason suburbs look identical. When zoning allows more flexibility, architecture follows. Different housing types, different building forms, different streetscapes. Uniformity begins to dissolve. 3. The rise of mixed-use suburbs. A new suburban model is emerging, one where homes are closer together, shops are within walking distance, streets are narrower and calmer, public spaces matter again. This is not a return to cities, it is a reinvention of suburbia. Developers now market walkable communities and 15-minute neighborhoods, ideas borrowed directly from pre-war urban design. Ironically, the future of suburbs looks more like America before suburban sprawl: compact, human-scaled, less car-dominated. 4. Why uniformity is losing its appeal. For decades, sameness was a selling point. It meant safety, it meant stability, it meant social belonging. But younger generations see it differently. Millennials and Gen Z increasingly value individuality, authenticity, local character, flexibility over permanence. Identical houses now feel restrictive rather than reassuring. Cookie-cutter design no longer represents success, it represents stagnation. This cultural shift is forcing developers to rethink suburban aesthetics. More varied facades, more diverse housing types, more architectural expression. 5. Climate and energy are rewriting suburbia. The original suburbs were built assuming cheap gasoline, endless water, stable climate conditions. Those assumptions no longer hold. Suburbs are now among the most vulnerable areas to extreme heat, flooding, wildfire, energy costs. Long commutes increase emissions. Large homes consume more energy. Low-density layouts strain infrastructure. As climate pressure grows, future suburbs will need to build denser, use less land, reduce car dependence, adapt regionally instead of nationally. This naturally leads to more variation and less sameness. 6. Technology is breaking the old model. Remote work is quietly reshaping suburban life. When daily commuting is no longer required, proximity to highways matters less, local amenities matter more, home design needs flexibility. Suburbs built solely as bedroom communities are losing relevance. Future suburbs must support home offices, local co-working, neighborhood-scale commerce. This shifts architecture away from uniform floor plans and toward adaptability. Sameness becomes inefficient. 7. The legacy of sameness will remain. Despite these changes, the legacy of uniform suburbs will not disappear overnight. Millions of identical homes already exist. Their infrastructure will last decades. Their layouts are difficult to undo. The American suburb will not suddenly transform. Instead, it will evolve unevenly. Some areas will densify and diversify. Others will remain frozen in time. The future will be mixed, just like the country itself. 8. What identical suburbs really taught us. American suburbs look the same because they were never meant to express identity. They were meant to deliver efficiency, control, predictability, mass affordability. They are not architectural failures. They are policy success stories, built exactly as intended. But intentions change, and when they do, architecture follows. 9. The big question moving forward. The question is no longer, why do American suburbs look exactly the same?
The real question is, will the next generation accept that sameness? Or will they demand something different? More choice, more diversity, more human-scale design. The answer to that question will shape the next century of American landscapes. 10. Final thought. Deep authority close. American suburbs are not accidents. They are the physical result of history, policy, economics, and culture, frozen in wood, asphalt, and zoning codes. Understanding why they look the same allows us to imagine how they could look different. Because architecture does not just shape where we live, it shapes how we live. This is architecture history.
Before this video ends, take a moment to look around where you live. Your street, your house, the distance between buildings, the parking space, the silence. American suburbs didn't just happen. They were designed intentionally to reflect a specific idea of safety, comfort, and success. But that idea came with trade-offs. Some people love the space, the quiet, the predictability. Others feel isolated, dependent on cars, disconnected from real community. So here's the real question. Do suburbs represent freedom, or are they a design choice that quietly limits how we live? If you grew up in the suburbs, did you enjoy it, or did you feel trapped? And if you could redesign American suburbs today, what would you change first? Tell us your experience in the comments. Different perspectives matter here. And if you want more deep stories about architecture, cities, and how design shapes society, subscribe to Architecture History, because the places we build end up building us.